So Salesforce had their earnings, and it was also a preview of the Trailblazer DX conference. You know what? I'm going to let you hit the numbers. I think what I want to hit is the sermon that CEO Mark Benioff gave on the call. It truly was incredible. And listen, I'm not like a million view go viral, but I had 60,000 people. Actually, I guess 80,000 people between LinkedIn and X kind of come in and read this. But it was a sermon.
Benioff read it. I mean, I'm just saying.
I know Benioff liked it. By the way, right after you, I'm pretty sure that you motivated Mark Benioff after you liked it
I
for
don't
him to
know.
go in and
I
like
don't
it.
know. I don't
But a
know.
lot of his senior staff, his chief of staff, a lot of great. So I must have said something of interest, and I don't recommend, hey, you got to go and look at this, but I would recommend going in and listening to this and reading the transcript. It was one of the things that really hit a sweet spot, Dan. I mean, what have you and I been talking about forever about AI is that you've got to get your data platform in order, right? And what's new about generative AI that's different about machine learning is you're commingling data types more than ever. And true Salesforce spirit. They talk about the customer needs, and not just the customers. With what CEOs were looking through AI. And Dan, I've heard there's a lot of alignment with what you've been saying on shows, which is productivity, higher customer value, and that's something that I hit on a lot. I call it stickiness, and finally increasing margins, which really is a result of customer proximity and lowering costs. And it was good, but he went right after what he characterized as all amalgamated, stolen public data sets, without saying, how do you say OpenAI without, and Gemini from Google without saying Google and
Hey, look,
Gemini
hey,
and
Pat,
OpenAI?
just real quickly, there is a truth to it. There's two sets. There's the data that all these companies have used, that they've taken every publicly piece of available data that they could scrape off the net, and they've used that as a training set. And then there's companies that are building things based on proprietary training sets. And who have we not from the very beginning said where the real value of this is going to lie?
Yeah, I mean the real value is just what Mark said, right? And the only two models I'm aware of that actually cite their data sources are those from IBM and those from Salesforce. I had my AI model expert Paul kind of dig into, is this legit? But Salesforce actually has their own models. You want to bring your own model, you can bring your own model. You want to use the Salesforce models, you can do that too. So it was good. And even made a pretty funny comment about hallucinations are not a feature. And he talked about that airline's chatbot story when the chatbot actually made up some offerings that didn't exist, and the end user took them to court, and the airlines apparently had to actually pay what the chatbot offered. So the company liability from
The free truck, the free.
I know it's straight. See, I remember the truck. I don't remember the airline that he went through. He didn't name names on this one,
Yeah.
but it was pretty good. And then he talks about the ecosystem, right? Essentially, trapped data inside of Snowflake, Databricks, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. He said, "Put your hands up if you're using Snowflake every day out there." Right? It was just absolutely hilarious and true. And Dan, what did you and I say 2 weeks ago on the Cloudera stage, which was essentially we didn't use the word trapped data, but we said having data that's spread across on-prem, colo, private cloud that's on-prem somewhere, and public cloud and SaaS. And that's trapped data. And it's trapped data gets back to the commingling of different types of data with Gen AI. So, hey, did I love this just because he's affirming what you and I have been talking about all the time? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Maybe.
Pat, it's not a topic without a victory lap. Sorry.
Totally. Totally.
It never
By
makes
the
sense.
way, possibly my favorite, which is what he said about NVIDIA. He essentially characterized NVIDIA as being the Levi's jeans of the gold rush. And, who's the gold? It's Salesforce. Then he said, I love NVIDIA, by the way.
Yeah.
So it's just, it was classic. Getting down to brass tacks here, I mean, Data Cloud is the punchline, right? Data Cloud is the data and metadata service that is, by the way, fastest growing product ever in the history. I didn't get the stats on if that's a percentage, dollar, what it is. 25% of fourth quarter deals over $1 million had Data Cloud in it. 7 trillion records ingested in the fourth quarter. Okay. So it's a big deal. And again, you think of Salesforce's CRM, they're going for it. They want Salesforce Data Cloud to be the data cloud for all of your data. Now, what they could be doing better, which again, I don't think they do a good job at. They don't do a very good job explaining that data cloud is irrespective of where your data is. How do I get this on-prem? MuleSoft has a lot to do with this. There's APIs, but I really think they need to go the extra mile and do better talking about how you can leverage on-prem data. Because what is the biggest question that we get from enterprises, Dan? How do I activate my on-prem data in this generative AI world? Right? Is it RAG? Is it something different? Is it some API? Is it metadata that I have to create on-prem that I ship to the cloud? It's a big question. So the end of the sermon, Benioff said, "Hey, there's nobody else out there that has anything like this. Text me or email and tell me what you think." And let me read this. "Because if you see anyone else being able to deliver on the promise of enterprise AI at the level of quality and scale and capability of Salesforce, I'll be very surprised." Anyways, check out Trailblazer DX. I've got my data analyst, Robert Kramer, attending, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, that was a sermon.
That was my sermon on the
I
sermon.
appreciated very much. I maybe even cited him a few times in calls we had with some other CEOs, because we talked to a lot of the CEOs of these companies this week that reported, especially in the infrastructure side and on some of the AI hardware side, and kind of asking those questions. Pat, NVIDIA's 80 to 85% of these AI project bombs. They're controlling the entire margin and keeping all that margin. And so these companies are talking about AI, but it's like, how well are they doing from selling, AI servers? It's clearly, we'll get to Dell later, it can help when you report it correctly. But when you're talking about operation and contribution margin, there's a pretty large gold rush to be made on the inference side of things. And the inference is going to be done on the data that's going to be coming out the enterprise. So, we had a great conversation this week with the CFO of SAP. We've had some conversations with the folks at Salesforce. Number of conversations with the leadership at ServiceNow. By the way, we're going to have an announcement around that, something there pretty soon. And they're building the software that is going to be enabling companies to be really profitable and productive. And there's a lot of profit in that, Pat. The profit scale in software is huge. And by the way, NVIDIA gets this. Like, sometimes, to Mark's comment, like, what he doesn't get is, like, I actually said a long time ago that NVIDIA's valuation was trapped in its software, its systems, and its frameworks. And the hardware is just the kind of thing that goes out the door. The biggest risk that they have, besides margin contraction from competition, is margin contraction from competition that builds frameworks and software that allows people to develop applications for AI that don't require their really, really expensive hardware.
Are you thinking about more like ServiceNow?
Well, that was what I said. Like, ServiceNow is a for instance. I mean, they're certainly partnering with NVIDIA deeply. Everybody is. But there hasn't really been an alternative. But Mark is on the right track with what he's saying. But unfortunately, kind of like my op-ed about NVIDIA, it's going to depend more on how it ages than how it sounds right now. Because right now it's provocative. Longer term, though, the truth is if growth does contract, and slow. And then dollars in AI start to move to Salesforce, for instance, where the money that's being made on the margin is, hey, we've added all this data cloud business, all this Genie revenue, and our customers are spending 35% more on average. They're bringing in tons and tons of data into the data cloud, running all these applications, expanding to use more of our applications. So it goes back to the Copilot for Finance. It's an application of AI, but how does Microsoft make money? And we know that it's the $10 per, $35 per for Copilot. But when you have hundreds of millions of users, that can be a really, really attractive business model for these other software companies. That's where it's, hey, how quickly can they ramp revenue, add to margin, et cetera. So, by the way, they beat.
Yeah, I think
I'm not gonna dive too much into the earnings, because you know what, I think this was a way more interesting conversation that everybody could read. But they beat on the top, they beat on the bottom. I believe it was kind of a muted guidance. It was a softer guidance, and I think that's why the company didn't get like a huge boost from it. One of the things I said in one of my comments to the press was basically, I expect a little bit of talk about the AI contribution to revenue. It sounds like he kind of got around it a little bit, Pat. With I didn't get to listen to the whole call, with his comment about the fastest growth. But again, my thing has been, Pat, fastest growth is one thing. Fastest growth plus very specific, like Azure added 3%, 6%, like those guys, like Dell 40% order book. Like,
right.
really specific numbers. I don't think we quite got there yet, but it's getting.
He didn't. He didn't. And they got some really good questions on that. And that is a question. Like, wait a second, Mark. If the AI is so great, why are you still, in 10x% growth range? And what I loved his answer, and it makes a lot of sense. What do we always say? You've got to get your data platform in order before you light these things up. And that's exactly what I think his customers are doing, is getting your data lined up first and then activating it.